yes, it's nice to acquire things. I'm not trying to tell anybody that they can't and or shouldn't acquire things. You want new clothes and shoes, you want to feel nice, you want jewelry, whatever, great. But at the end of the day, if it doesn't feel meaningful, you'll get those things and then go, what's next? What's the next thing I can acquire? Where do I get this feeling of finally like I made it, like I'm enough? And it's like, if you don't feel like you're enough deep down inside, it doesn't matter what you manifest. You're going to always look for more. So that, like, when does it end?
Welcome to the Happiness in Progress podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Craig. I'm an Emmy Award-winning journalist, international speaker, mom, wife, and you know what I like to say, just a person looking for more joy in the everyday. This is a space where you belong, not because you earned it, not because of your title, your paycheck, or number of kids you have, but just because you are human and you are good. Here we explore progress over perfection, emotional and spiritual wellness, and how to relish the good parts of life that coexist with the not so good parts. This is Happiness in Progress. You guys, this conversation was so healing to me, and I am so excited that I get to share it with you today. Let me introduce you to today's guest. Today, you are going to be hearing from Alea Lovely. She is a spiritual advisor, mindset coach, author, and philosopher who has established herself as a leading voice in the field of spiritual guidance. She releases her new book, Meaningful Manifestation, in November, and we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about what meaningful manifestation is. We're going to talk about how to find what's authentic to you. And in this process, we're going to get really deep. We are going to sit with some uncomfortable feelings, and we're going to get down into, the rot, as she calls it. And we are also going to make sure we understand the privilege of manifesting. I just absolutely love this conversation. So let's get to it. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to talk to you.
So as I was looking through your book, I kind of had a sense that you see manifestation maybe a little differently than the typical person.
Yeah.
Do you think that might
so.
be true? Yeah. So
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about what that difference is.
Well, I think that the traditional way that we've learned about manifestation has been in the positive thinking era. Those of you who are OG manifestors, we probably heard of The Secret. And fantastic book. Like, I don't want to take away from the book. Rhonda Byrne was kind of leading the forefront in that time period when it was time to think differently about our circumstances. And I think it was really exciting for a lot of people to know that they could change their circumstances with their thoughts, so that they could have a different perspective. But I do feel like in a lot of ways it left people of marginalized communities or people who have different circumstances or people who've grown up in war-torn countries out of the equation, and kind of gaslit us into thinking that we weren't thinking positively enough. And so that's why it was not available to us. And I seem to think that, the law of attraction is not a law, it's a principle. So like gravity works for everyone. Doesn't matter how much money you make. Doesn't matter how much privilege you have. It works the same no matter what. And with the law of attraction, we're looking at a different process in what it means to actually manifest from where you're starting from. That our world, the world that we live in, is not a fair place. And everybody doesn't get a fair shot. And people who look differently or make different amounts of money or were born in different places don't have access to a certain amount of things that other people might have access to. And so I found it really agitating and irritating to be told you're just not thinking positively enough, when it's like, well, I didn't grow up in areas where I had access to this knowledge and or maybe the experiences, I wasn't chosen for certain things because of my race or, whatever the thing is. And knowing that the uphill I had to face was more difficult than those of my counterpart. And then also seeing that I had privileges that other people didn't have. The parents that I grew up with, they did the best that they could, and they did a good job at being like, you can do whatever you want to do, even though we came from really, really humble beginnings. From a mental standpoint, I had privilege because my parents took time to invest in me the ideas that I could do whatever. So I've gone through the world always thinking like, yeah, I can do that. And having the audacity to try, which a lot of other people didn't have that. If you grew up in a household where your parents were always like bitching at you or, just always criticizing you or whatever. And you didn't have that self-esteem if you grew up with a narcissistic parent, et cetera. So there are lots of intersectionalities where we might have different starting points that affect how we see the world. And those are our unique imprints of what our soul is trying to learn about ourselves and how we discover our most authentic being. But I believe that manifestation is a process of knowing the self, knowing what it is you actually desire, starting to dig into your intuition. It's not just about acquiring things.
I got goosebumps several times as you were talking.
Yeah.
I loved in the book how you wrote manifesting is a privilege. I think that might be exactly what you wrote, but I think it's good to recognize that because our backgrounds put us at different starting points.
Right.
And I think it's very difficult to see someone, to watch someone, or especially to hear people talking about manifestation and say, but I've been doing this. Why am I not there? Why am I not there?
Yeah.
But the starting point is different. And I love that recognition that you make because it gives grace for one, for the individual.
And to your point, yeah, the aspect in the book that I talk about manifesting being a privilege, if you don't have your basic needs met, like it's going to be really difficult to get in the headspace of positive thinking or perspective. Like it's not all about positive thinking, but you're more likely to recognize opportunities and things that are ahead of you when you are in a safe space. If you're not in a safe space, if you're in an abusive marriage, if you're living in a war-torn country, if you're having, you don't know when you're going to be able to pay your rent next month, how are you to then think of the creative $1 million idea? It just will not feel available to you. Instead, you might resource to something that feels the closest to possibility instead of being able to say, I can generate this out of nowhere. Like if you haven't rubbed $5 together, like how are you telling yourself I can be a millionaire? It's probably just going to exacerbate the lack that you already feel in your life. So you first have to kind of look at where your circumstances are and get to a place where you are not in survival mode before. It's not like before you can start entertaining these practices, but before you can in a way that is very accountable to the way that it works. Because if you're in a place where you're in survival mode, the survival instincts are always going to kick in. What is going to be in my best and highest good to make sure that my kids eat, to make sure that I get through the next day, that I survive mentally. Like those things are going to come first before you're able to think about manifestation.
And I don't hear enough people talking about this. I'm trying to think if I've really heard anybody talk about
I
this.
didn't
So
hear anyone talking about it. And that's in my brain was going, what the heck is going on?
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
truly, truly. And I think about even one of my close friends, we have very similar backgrounds, similar, we were raised similarly, similar privilege, probably up until the time we got married. And then one of us went off into a healthy relationship and one of us went off into a very toxic relationship. And that even changed that level of safety and security to be able to move forward and do something like this.
Right.
So I think it's all different kinds of things. And I'm just so glad you're bringing awareness to this.
Thank you.
So just absolutely loved reading that. And then you just mentioned this. This is also something people are not talking about. And this is a trap I get caught up into. A lot of times we think manifesting is about acquiring. Like, I'm going to sit down, I'm
Mm,
going to manifest this $1 million idea. I'm going to manifest 1 million people are going to read my book. 1 million
yeah.
people are going to follow me on social media. I want to read this quote that you wrote in your new book. And it says, quote, when we
Mm,
manifest something we want into our life, if it's meaningful, then it changes us and helps move us a little further along into the people we want to become. The constant need for just acquiring stuff masks who we are at the core and instead hyper focuses on what people see that can validate our existence. We use things as status, leverage, and proof that we are worthy of being seen, even being loved. We become so focused on managing all the stuff that those layers can sometimes cloud who we are at our core. End quote. I just thought that was so powerful because you're right. The acquiring, we're spending far too much time manifesting, acquiring more. Tell me about how you came to this. When was that moment of realization?
mm. Well, I think so in 2021, I guess I went on this, no, 2020. I went on this manifesting journey. I had been trying to manifest the partner the house, the family, and whatever. And we went into COVID. So I was immediately out of a job. I was a photographer full time. I was doing podcasts a little bit at that time. And I was doing some spiritual work as well, kind of on the side. And so as soon as I found myself out of this job, it was like, okay, like what now? I'm without a home. I had just moved back from Bali. I'd gone on an eat, pray, love journey.
Love
um,
that.
and I was just in a space where I was like, I don't know who I am and feeling like a massive failure. It's like, I don't have any backup. I don't have any savings. I don't have this. I don't have that. And so this feeling of what do I need to get in order to feel safe? Like I want to have an apartment. I need to make sure I have furniture. I have this and that or whatever. So I eventually was able to make enough money to do that and move back into my own place when I moved back to Kansas City. And from there, I met my husband through just a random like Bumble, let's meet up because what George Floyd had happened. And I wanted to check on Black men and see how they were doing because we all experienced that collective trauma together, people of color. And so when we met, it was like, oh my God, like I had a dream about him while I was in Bali, telling him to wait for me, February
Wow.
22nd, 222, crazy. Um, so I had manifested that, and then we got pregnant on purpose, but I had been told by my doctors I would not be able to get pregnant without assistance because I have all these
Mm.
issues with me. Veda came in like a bullet train. I manifested the house that I dreamt about beforehand, and and my job started to take off. The podcast started to take off. So all of these things I had been wanting for a large amount of time, all of a sudden I had. And everybody's like, wow, you must be some manifesting guru. You did it so fast. And I was like, no, it's been 15 years of just like one thing after another of really wanting these things and never having them come to fruition. So when it finally did I had this like windfall and being in that space thinking like, wow, I'm finally getting everything that I've wanted and imagined for my life for a very long time. But then when I wake up at 3 a.m. breastfeeding a colicky child who will not go to sleep and my house is too big to clean and my kids are asking, like just having all of these frustrations around the manifesting things that I acquired, me going, is this what I wanted? And of course, it's what I wanted. Like, I'm obsessed with my daughter. Like, I'm obsessed with my husband. I love my house, but not really understanding and knowing all that the responsibility that's required in the thing that I was asking for. And knowing that I wasn't actually ready to have those things before I was 36, 37 years old. And so the hindsight being like, oh, I understand why I didn't get it then. But there also being this feeling of like what is meaningful to me, it will be worth it. Like the things that I took on, the bigness of the things that I was asking for, they were meaningful to my life and showing me who I was as a person and showing me what it was I could take on, even though I went through immense trauma through that process. I had a postpartum hemorrhage and almost died
Mm.
in my birth.
Mm.
And having to deal with the trauma of that and going through that and still working and trying to hold space for people in this job that I had wanted and manifested and just not realizing that like at the end of the day, I'm a person here. I'm a human here. And the things that I'm asking for, while beautiful, will always require me to level up. Always. So if you want that car, I want this car, I have this dream car, I want to show this car off. That car requires you to work 60 more hours a month in order to keep that car. Are you willing to take that on? And I think sometimes we don't think about what we would need to sacrifice or work harder towards or whatever the energy that it might take on in order to level ourselves up. And I think that that's how manifestation shows up in the things. Yes, it's nice to acquire things. I'm not trying to tell anybody that they can't and or shouldn't acquire things. You want new clothes and shoes, you want to feel nice, you want jewelry, whatever, great. But at the end of the day, if it doesn't feel meaningful, you'll get those things and then go, what's next? What's the
Mhm.
next thing I can acquire? Where do I get this feeling of finally like I made it, like I'm enough? And it's like if you don't feel like you're enough deep down inside, it doesn't matter what you manifest, you're going to always look for more. So that like when does it end? Like, and manifestation to me is seasonal. It's not year round. Capitalistic society would have you believe it is a year round thing. Like you must be manifest. What are you doing next? What's next, girl? Like, okay, what's next? What's the next position? And when do you get a place of contentment or satiation? When do you get a place of gratitude where you're like, I've done enough. Until next season, I'll see y'all later. Like we don't see TV shows airing year round, or like not most of them, right? There's seasons to that. And so we need seasons of that growth. We need seasons of the reflection. We need seasons of observing what's good for us. And sometimes we get those manifestations and go, oh, this is not what I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. And then you get to refine that process. You get to go through that process all over again and say, what I actually wanted was this. And now you've grown.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Did I answer your question?
Oh, yes, and so many more. Where to start? Let's go to you mentioned middle of the night, baby, and the moment is this what I manifested? And I think that's such a human thought, and I've had that thought, and there's no shame around those kind of thoughts. But let's talk about how you deal with that moment.
hmm Yeah. So I think for me personally, gratitude is really important. What I talk about in the book is our maxims. What are our top 5 maxims for our life? Because if we don't know at the end of our life what's going to be the top 5 things that we want, we felt like made a good life for us, it will feel almost empty and what it is that we're manifesting. And so knowing that I wanted a family, knowing that this is something that was really important to me. I wanted to be a mom. I didn't let myself like actually want it because I was afraid I wouldn't get to be a mom and I didn't want to go through the
Mhm.
suffering of like that feeling like, oh, I didn't get to have that thing. But getting to be a mom and knowing what that has been like my daughter is just magic to me. And I have 2 bonus kids that are absolutely amazing as well. And getting to be a mom has, as any mom would know, presents its challenges for sure. But because of it, I've grown so much as a person. I've matured so much as a person. I've learned more about myself as a person and what I can take and what I can't. And so in those moments, like, yeah, I was postpartum, I was having PTSD. I was having a lot that I was going through at the moment. So don't know that in that moment there was anything to do. But when I came to a rested, more sober place, being able to acknowledge that, like, wow, I really don't ask for help very well. Like, oh, I don't have supportive community. When I feel like I'm failing, I tend to isolate. And me recognizing that's not good for my mental state and noticing that, like, okay, in this moment, whether it be hard or not, I have an opportunity to know myself more,
Mm,
and which I think is the soul's journey. Like the soul is trying to know itself more. And I think that's what the purpose manifestation serves. It's not to acquire the things, but to, through the things, being able to see who are you really? Like when you get all this money, are you generous? Are you greedy? Are you still in scarcity? Like when you get that job that you finally want, are you a hard worker? Do you give up at the first sight of trouble? Do you work too hard and never rest? Like it is a process of discovery. The soul wants to know itself. So in this process of manifesting, it also shows us our magic. And so in this moment, I'm looking down at this tiny baby screaming her head off, my body not giving her what she needs, and being like, I need to be able to ask for help. That's magic too, you
yeah.
know? And being able to ground that in the human experience. I gave myself a lot more grace through that process. Whereas before I'd been so hard on myself. I know a lot of us are. Oldest child, anyone?
Yeah,
Like,
right.
like
Exactly.
just always the thinking that I'm failing or I'm not doing it well enough or whatever, and getting to that complete broken down place of going, I need to be able to ask for help.
Mm,
That's also okay. So it taught me a lot about myself in that regard, and it gives me a lot of gratitude that I had that experience. But I think unfortunately we are so pain averse that we are often trying to circumvent discomfort. And if
mm,
because we're unwilling to look at discomfort, we don't have a chance to look at ourselves.
yeah. Yeah. I have a child on the spectrum and it is
Same.
very challenging. Oh,
Yeah.
you really?
Yeah, my stepson.
It is so it is very
Hmm.
challenging and it's very easy to go to that place of like, I manifested this.
Hmm.
But I love leaning into the soul's journey. What am I
Hmm.
learning here? Um, because it is true that I have experienced so much growth from being his mom that I would have um, never gotten any other way. Have you studied Kabbalah?
Yeah.
I love it, and I love the idea that people come into my life specifically to help my soul evolve, and that
Mm.
is his case 100%. My soul has
Mm.
evolved because I know him, much less
He's
am
your
his
teacher.
mother. Yes.
Mm. Yeah.
100%. Okay, so let's go and talk about determining what a good life is. And I love in the book, because this is how you can come up with those maxims for a good life, is to get
Hmm.
really clear on what a good life to you is. So I think so that you don't end up at the end of your life and you're like, did I have a good life? Well, I was really chasing that million followers and the yacht.
Hmm.
So let's talk about that. What is a good life? How to determine that for yourself?
So in the book, I talk about the five maxims, and maxims are your values, basically. Like at the end of the day, if you got to the end of your life, what would be of highest priority for you that you would have experienced that would have made you feel like, okay, I had a good life? And I thought about this because my aunt passed away early. She passed away at 52. And just thinking like, goodness, like she had so much more life to live. Did she have a good life? Did she feel like she had a good life? And I started doing research. I've always been really fascinated with NDEs and people coming back and suddenly changing their life massively after going and nearly losing their life, and what that does to someone, what that how that changes a person. And so I started thinking, like, I mean, you could have 20 maxims, but you can't really remember those. So I narrowed it down to five and thought like the five top things to have not a great life, but a good one. Like what feels sufficient. And for me, those and they change throughout your life, right? So like they're not set in stone. Like depending on where you're at in your life, there's certain things that you finally met those needs, and then you move on and you have different needs. But time with my family was top. Having a romantic relationship, a partnership of some sort was really important. I have it now, so it's not necessarily a maxim of sorts. It's a part of time with my family. Financial security being one of those, so I can have comfort in living, to reduce my stress. Because if you don't have that,
Mm-hmm.
it can be
Mm-hmm.
very stressful. Passions achieved, creative endeavors fulfilled, things like that. So people making those lists, and there are larger categories that they can all kind of fit in as far as like the value system, but then you can create what your manifestation process is, because sometimes we are trying to manifest from our inauthentic desires, like what society is trying to tell us that we need to be
What
doing.
your mom wanted you to do.
Right.
Yeah.
You're supposed to be a doctor, and it's just like, or what they wanted for their lives that they've projected onto you, and those aren't your core values.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times I work with a lot of clients around their intuition, and a lot of times it's not about us building our intuition, it's pulling off what everybody else said you should be or you should do. What is your heart's desire? And like ultimately at the end of the day, what would actually make you happy? So financial security would make me happy, but being a cajillionaire may not,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like I'd probably
Mm-hmm.
be cool on 200,000 a year. We'd be able to, like, my husband wouldn't have to work, like just being able to have my time with my family because that's so important to me. And that might be different for somebody else, but that being said, that to me is most quality. Like I
Mm-hmm.
thought having a really large house would be a part of that. And now we have a large house, and thankfully I'm happy about it. But like I'm like, this house is so hard to clean. Like it's so much to do, and I never get through the whole house in a day.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't live in like the best part of the neighborhood, so we got it for a really good deal. But like this aspect of like what's actually important to me is not necessarily the space, but that like my kids can run outside and play without me having to worry about anything, things like that. So that becomes refined over time. Ultimately, if I died tomorrow, I would have felt that I lived so strongly according to my maxims that I mean, obviously I'd be pretty bummed about not being Veda's mom for much
Yeah.
longer. That would
Right.
suck. But me being able to say I lived my best. Like I know that I did everything that I could do to live a good life. And I think sometimes people are so focused on the best life and what that means. So they're looking at other people and comparing themselves. How can I be higher? How can I be better? How can I make more? And it's like that doesn't actually make you happy. It's just for the validation to look and say, look, I'm better than that person. And if you just zero in and just take out all of the noise, all of the clutter of everybody else's BS, like, can you sit down and say, what actually makes me happy? For some people, that's a cabin in the woods without talking to anybody ever again, right?
Right.
Introverts unite. So, and that can look very differently, but if we don't have the courage to actually ask for that, to actually dig down in ourselves and go, what are my authentic desires? Then it makes it really difficult to then go through my process called the Imagine Method, because you need to be able to single down like what would actually make me happy. Like, do I really need all this extra stuff or would this do?
Mm-hmm. I think this is so easy to say, get your authentic desires, find your authentic desires. But when you've been living by everyone else's desires
Mm-hmm.
for decades, I think it's very hard to kind of like start peeling back the layers to figure out
Yeah.
who you really are, because
Yeah.
that was probably quieted when you were a child and you've been just
Yeah.
chasing what the world told you to chase this whole time. What would you say to someone who's kind of starting out at the beginning of that, or is just having a hard time reaching that true self and that true desires? Where to start?
Yeah. So I would start with the rot. So, what are the things that you often tell yourself that sound really mean?
Mm,
Like, oh, I don't do this good enough, or I don't do, where did that come from? Where did that voice come from? I'm not skinny enough. I'm not this, I'm not that. Like, if we all just sat with ourselves for a little bit and a little bit of discomfort, we could probably source where those messages came from, right? So, for instance, I've always been a woman of size. My mother struggled with her weight, and she told me, hey, you have my body type. You're always going to struggle with your weight. I'm sorry. And it's like,
mm,
man, she didn't know then that that was going to stick. She wasn't saying it
yeah.
in a malicious way. She felt bad that I might have to go through what she goes through and how she sees herself. And that came from society. That was the snack well generation, fat free, everything, you know. But I then internalizing that tape and really like, you know, it adhering to me in some way or another, always self conscious about my weight, always. And what it ends up manifesting then is I have a weight problem. I have a
Mm,
hormone problem. I have an issue here. I have an issue there, whatever. I grew up in the Christian church, so my body was always problematic, having big boobs. I was a stumbler for
mm-hmm,
my brother, patriarchy, and so on. So, like, I always felt this like I'm not allowed to be seen. I should be invisible. I don't want people to know me because that, like, I might cause someone to stumble. God forbid I do anything like that. And then when I was 18, I was kidnapped by a football player
oh
at
my
our school
gosh.
and was sexually assaulted. And like that cemented for me, my body is problematic. And if I'm in an attractive body, I will be harmed.
Mm,
So that cemented that belief that, like, okay, eat up, girl. This is the only way for you to stay safe. And in my brain, constantly going, you don't work out enough. You are lazy. You just keep eating. You have no self control, not knowing that the narrative deep down in my soul was that I am more afraid of men than I am afraid of death due to bad health.
mm,
That narrative getting in the way of my authentic desire, which was safety.
mm,
And how do I change that? Like the inauthentic desire is you're supposed to be a size 6 and below. You're supposed to be thin. You're not supposed to take up space, right? Society, you're
mm-hmm.
supposed to look young forever. You're supposed to look frail. Like, when can I live in a society where it's okay to age?
Yeah, right.
When can I live in a society where it's okay for me to take up space and look strong? Like me rewiring that and saying, all right, well, now when I go to the leg press, I can put on 550 pounds. I
Mm,
can leg press 550 pounds. The chicken guys at the gym look at me like, she cannot be able to do that. And
yeah,
like,
watch me.
watch me, right? Do you know Alana Mar?
Uh-huh. Oh my
Everybody, like,
gosh, I love
just
her.
why are we all so in love with this woman? Because she is speaking to our inner child.
Yeah.
She allows herself to take up space. She's strong and beautiful and feminine and masculine and all the things. She gets to be both. And she's unabashedly healing us in the process, right? So it's awakening something in us, right? Like we're all going through this collective awakening of like, what is our authentic, what would actually make me happy? Does it make me happy to fit in a size 6? Why?
Mm-hmm.
Why? When my bones don't even fit. like why would that be something I
Yeah.
want, you know? And I'm obviously still dealing with that, but like if I can manifest according to what my actual desire is to be strong, to look intimidating. Nobody fuck with me. you know, like, and that's kind of how I look. My mom used to say, oh man, you got these like buff arms. Like when you walk down, like you look like nobody can mess with you.
Yeah.
And me being able to feel like I love that about
Yeah.
myself. That is my authentic desire. So now my maxim is different. It's not to lose 40 pounds, it's to bench 100. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? So
Mm-hmm.
in that way, we get to anchor that down. So when people, back to your question, when people come to a space of saying like, what is my authentic desire? Go through those little rot messages of like, I don't make enough money. Why? Okay, because I can't make my ends meet or whatever. Are you afraid of money? What are the tropes that you heard your parents say all the time? We don't have enough. We can't afford it. Or like, don't spend all your money. You need to save it for a rainy day, or whatever the thing is. So those beliefs come from somewhere, and a lot of them really end up cementing by the time we're 7 years old. They're foundational beliefs that come from outside. And then especially like something that I'm really thankful for is being a person of color meant that I never fit in certain places and spaces that I've gone into. And you said it sounds funny to say, why would you be thankful for that? But when I became of age to decide I wanted to do something, I didn't have the fear that I would be ostracized because of it. I was
Mm,
already ostracized.
yeah.
So I was already outside of the group. I was already weird. I was already like, we don't want to hang out with her. She's a wannabe. Like, me, then it's like, well, I had nothing to lose. And what I
Mm-hmm.
see oftentimes, especially with some of my white girlfriends who are incredibly talented, is their fear of going outside the box
Mm,
because they've learned that the safety zone is right here in this box in the conformity. So that it to me is a harder box to break outside of
mm,
because it's like you've been taught all your life that you fit here and you're safe here. But if you decide to go outside of this box, we'll annex you too, you know?
yeah.
So like
Yeah.
there can be a lot that you'll have to work through and a lot of courage even have to gain to just give yourself what your heart actually wants.
I think it's going to be hard for a lot of people to hear because they know they're sitting in that box because it's safe. Everyone likes them in that box
Yeah.
and they're worried about what it's going to be on the outside. I want to go back to sitting in that rot and confronting that because I think that was such a powerful moment that you shared. And I think that it's also a very scary place to sit
Yeah.
because it's much easier to be like, yeah, of course I want to lose 40 pounds than confronting I'm afraid of what it looks like. I'm afraid for my safety. I'm
Yeah.
afraid. I think that's a lot scarier to confront that. But I love the end goal. And the end goal is having that really meaningful manifestation
Hmm.
because that because it means something.
Because you're not manifesting just the thing, you're
Yeah.
manifesting a perspective.
Yeah.
You're manifesting healing. You're manifesting growth. You're manifesting self-love. Like these are intangible things that are far more important than the materialistic things that we often put on a pedestal.
And we can stop hiding behind the materialistic things.
Yeah.
But it's a journey.
Yes, it is. Not an
What is
easy one.
so let's talk a little bit about the anti-beliefs, the
Mm,
anti-beliefs. How do we determine what those are, especially as we're trying to have meaningful manifestations? How can
mhm.
we determine what our anti-beliefs are?
The anti-belief is I can have this, but I can't because.
Mm,
Like I want this, but I can't have it because. I want to lose weight, but I can't have it because. I want to make this money, but I can't have it because. There's usually that, especially when we're confronting the box, like, oh, I can't do that. Why? And whatever that narrative is, most likely serves us in some way. We don't have narratives that don't serve us. So sometimes, even if they're negative narratives and if they're hateful narratives to ourselves, they serve us in some way. Either it serves and feeds our self hate, it serves and feeds our safety, it serves and feeds areas where we are fearful and don't have the courage yet to take the step, right? And so, having to come into contact with that anti belief, for instance, I want to start a podcast and me being like, well, I don't have anything to talk about. My
mm,
Mercury is on my midheaven. I always have something to talk about. Okay. For you astrology girls. So what was it about that? I'm afraid of being seen. I've have this fear of being seen. What keeps me from public speaking is I'm afraid I'm going to stand on stage and people are going to know I'm fat.
mm,
That. And look,
mm.
it shows up super weird because it's not that people have denied me the chance to be able to speak on stage. It's not that I don't have opportunity and connections where I can get that to happen right now.
Yeah.
It's not like I don't have a TEDx talk thing sitting in my inbox right now that I have not filled out, right?
Yeah.
It is that like people are going to see me and
Hmm.
having to deal with that, right? And that's like we call it the anti-belief because it's the thing standing in the way. Anti-belief would actually be I don't want people to see me. I can't have that because then people are going to think this about me, right? So it counters my safety zone. It counters my
Hmm.
comfort zone. I want to be able to start my own business, but I don't have enough knowledge in that particular area. You know how many mediocre people are running businesses out here?
Hmm.
So many, making
Hmm.
millions of dollars. Idiots. Okay. Like just running a TikTok or
Yes.
YouTube or whatever,
Hmm.
just because they thought they could. They had the audacity to believe that they could. And that's
Hmm.
literally the only thing standing in loads of people's way. I always say this I don't have a lot of talent, but I've always had the audacity to try. Like,
Mm.
thankfully, because of my parents, I've always had the audacity to try. So when I'm like, I want to do this, And my ADHD superpower is like, okay, well, let's go do it. Hyper
Yeah.
focus. I'll get into that space and decide I'm going to do this. Why not? Right. And it could fail miserably. Right. My first two books, absolute flops. This is the first book anybody's hearing about, and why? I put in the work to have the audacity to think that I could. Didn't work out the way I thought it should. I got experience. Second book I wrote because it was a book I needed to read. It helped me heal. It helped me grow. I had different expectations this time around. I became more neutral about it and said, okay, I'm all right writer. I'm not like the best wordsmith, but it's something I wanted to do for myself. So be it. And then the third book, like this one, I didn't even have to pitch to
Yeah.
anyone. Someone came into my inbox and said, "Do you want to write a book?" Oh man, I got you. You're asking me, the person who had two books that flopped prior? Like, you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like,
Yeah.
I just had the audacity to try. So I paint, I write, I have a podcast, I'm a photographer. I do healing energy work, whatever. I had the audacity to try. So I don't have super strong anti-beliefs as I'm getting older. I just turned 40 and it's like, okay, we're starting to narrow down a lot of those like little beliefs and that kind of just like have nagged at me a lot of my life. So if people have even just the balls to look at the areas where they tell themselves they can't do something, ask yourself why.
Mm-hmm.
Why can't you do it? Can you
Mm-hmm.
narrow that down? Who told you you couldn't do it? Oh, because last time I did it, I failed. Okay, so and you know what I'm saying? Like giving ourselves that excuse, it's serving us in some kind of way. How is it serving you? Is that where you want to stay? Is that cool for you to live a good life for the rest of your life? No?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So let's do something about it.
Yeah. And I love that the effort is never wasted. Those two prior books, that effort was not wasted.
No.
It was just that the universe knew the timing that you needed,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
Absolutely.
Um, my oh my gosh, we're out of time. I'll just quickly share my anti-belief.
Please.
As you're talking and as I was reading through the book. Is definitely around motherhood and success. And I
Mm.
am like, I hold on to this. I don't even know why it exists in there. Well, actually, I guess I do. That's society. I'm like, I can't have too much success because then like something bad's going to happen to my family. This is also my OCD. So it's like
Hmm.
too much success cannot exist with a successful family
Right.
because something's got to give and what's it going to be? And I always get too afraid when things get too
Mm.
good. But
Mm.
anyway, one more thing you said, I'm just going to mention this before I ask you my last question because this is
Mhm.
one of my another one of my stumbling blocks. I'm not good at surrendering. I'm the oldest child. I'm
Oh,
the
yeah.
A-type personality.
Yeah.
Like I'm totally red on the color list, 8 on the Enneagram. It's a total huge control issue for me.
Mm.
But you said you have to mean it when you ask, universe, what do you have
What do
for
you have
me?
for me?
Loved that. Okay, now let's get to the last question so I can let you go. What is your number one tip for finding more joy in the good, the bad, and the in between of life?
Number one tip. I mean, I have five, but I think for me is forgiving myself.
Mm,
I think that we are so hard on ourselves all the time. It's so difficult for us to be present and find joy. We're always looking how we can do something better or ruminating over what we did wrong or what we said wrong, that we don't actually get to be present with the magic that we bring to the table in the first place that no one else is thinking about, like mistake wise. Like I'm like, oh, I said that wrong on that podcast or whatever. And it's like nobody even noticed that. My dad used to say, when we would get up and sing and stuff in school or school and church and whatnot, and if we made a mistake, and I would go stop and go, oh sorry, like I messed up or whatever, and he's like, don't tell people that you messed up. He's like, just keep going, like don't say like just keep going. And I've always taken that with me because this element of like we're so hyper focused on what we've done wrong that we never let ourselves forgive ourselves for that and move forward. Like there are definite parenting fails that I have had, and
mm-hmm.
like becoming a new mom at the same time of becoming a stepmom, going from single and doing whatever I want to have a family of five, like instantly, right, overnight,
Gosh.
and having to adjust the whiplash of like what that means to take that on, then learning I have sensory processing disorder. Wow. So my autistic son who stims all the time, and then my daughter who talks a lot, and like whatever, like the constant noise and how it dysregulates my nervous system and how I feel like a child that cannot regulate, and feeling so hyper upset with myself that I can't be the perfect mom. And like that I'm fearful that they're going to be in therapy about me because they're old enough to remember.
Mm-hmm.
And not just like saying, okay, this is a part of the process. Like they came in as my teachers and like I'm not going to score 100% on that first exam. I'm going to do my best, my absolute best, really in everything that I do. But if it's not perfect, it's okay. I'm human.
Mm-hmm.
You're human,
Mm-hmm.
giving ourselves that forgiveness so we can at least be present with what's happening right now. To me, when we're not forgiving to ourselves, we're always living in the past.
Yeah.
And then we're always living in the future and anxiety that we'll make the next mistake. And what always happens is when we're thinking about it, we end up doing it. Like it's such a
Mm-hmm.
high level focus. We end up manifesting the thing that we didn't want to happen because all we focus on is that thing. It's like, you're driving, you don't want to hit a pothole. And they're like, stop looking at the pothole. And you're like, I can't stop. Like you run right into it. They're like, what were you doing? And it's like it's always focused
Yeah.
on. I couldn't see anything else. So
Mm-hmm.
in that way, giving ourselves the forgiveness to me is like how we live a more joyful life.
Yes, I love that. And this conversation has been so healing to me.
Thank you.
I just love your energy and
Thank
like
you.
I just feel so uplifted after this conversation. I want to say about living in the present quickly. I anchored the news for about a decade and
Mm-hmm.
worked in it even longer before I started anchoring. And one of the things we were taught was if you make a mistake, don't come back and say like, "Hey, sorry about that issue. I'm live on
Yeah.
TV, but I'm going to tell you this dumb mistake I made." You just move forward and say, "Hey,
Yeah.
we just want to let you know this is the truth." And you just move forward. You don't have to spend all that time in the
Right.
past talking about what happened before the commercial break.
People
So
have moved on.
yeah, everybody's moved on.
Yeah.
Yes, I love that you mentioned that, and I love that your dad said that. Anyway, thank you so much for this conversation. I'm so excited to share it because I feel so good after it. So thank
Thank
you.
you. I appreciate that.
I hope you loved this conversation as much as I did. Of course, you can always find all of her contact information, all the links you need in show notes. And I want to thank you for being here on Happiness in Progress.